The thing I regret the most today is not having crossed the gaze of this man, but having tried to stand up to him. I didn't know what he was, but now it's far too late for me to make up for it. My name is Edward. I'm 28 years old, and I've been struck by a terrible curse. 4 days ago precisely, I met someone I should never have crossed paths with. Or rather, someone I should never have disrespected. Being a writer, I sometimes seek isolation to write. Quite often, to do this, I spend a few days in the family cabin, a handful of kilometers from any civilization. There is no phone, no internet, nor any other dwelling around. The only thing nearby is a gas station. And even then, the word proximity isn't really appropriate, since the station is about 20 kilometers from the cabin. As you can imagine, an adventure like this one must therefore be prepared as meticulously as possible. I need to plan for water, food, and something to entertain me a bit during the times when I'm not supposed to be writing. So, obviously, I went through a shopping center, just to be well prepared. I took canned goods, large bottles of water, and also a few books to find inspiration during my rest hours. Once I arrived at the parking lot, I put everything in the car, and I took the opportunity to make a small detour to the gas station, which was nearby to fill up. After paying, I leaned forward to put my wallet in my glove box. I wasn't prepared for that loud muted sound right then. Even less to find out what was causing that racket. It was me. I had just hit a person head-on with my car. With trembling hands, I slowly opened my car door. Only, I wasn't trembling with fear, but with anger. I immediately checked the condition of my car and noticed the big dent on the hood. I swept around me with my gaze to find who was the cause of all this. My car was almost new and had cost me the tidy sum of 82,000 euros, and I was not ready to let this go. A man, struggling to get up, was not far from my sedan. His legs were shaking, and he was having trouble getting back on his feet. The blood rushed to my head in a few seconds, and I ended up yelling, "Can't you look before crossing? Look what you've done." The man, who must have been in his 50s, laid his eyes for a few seconds on the car, with a neutral look. And then, the next moment, they landed on me. He furrowed his brows and looked me straight in the eyes. "It's an exit from a parking lot, sir. Pedestrians have the right of way." My fury grew in that instant. "You should review your road code. There is no parking lot. It's a gas station." The man's gaze darkened. It was as if hatred was gradually taking over him as our dialogues continued. If I understand correctly, the first thing to check when you hit someone for you is the state of their car. He had said that almost in a whisper, but yet everything was perfectly clear. I approached him, fists clenched, and I replied, "The car is new. It is. And you're approaching 60 and can't even tell the difference between a parking lot and a damn gas station. So yes, the fate of my car worries me much more than yours does." Even though his eyebrows were still furrowed, I noticed something changed on his face. As he was still staring me straight in the eyes, he stood up, and that's when I saw he was smiling at me. Not with a kind smile, but with a strange and frightening smile. "I see. Since you are so bad, sir, I will allow myself to offer you a little something, so that your mind is in perfect harmony with your body." His eyes opened wide, and for a moment, it was as if my body had been crossed by hundreds and hundreds of razor blades. I put my hand on my heart, thinking for a moment that I was about to have a heart attack, but nothing. Everything stopped as suddenly as it happened. I looked the man in the eyes and I said my very last sentence to him. "You're a lunatic. Go to hell." "Have a good day to you too, sir. May the upcoming days you will spend be most pleasant." I didn't attempt to grasp the meaning of his final words. The man was evidently mentally ill and no longer of sound mind. So I went back to the car and started driving towards the cabin. I intended to fix that nasty dent when I got back from my long work week. In any case, I was angry. Angry because even before my week started, I found myself having to fix something on my car. But You know, anger is a feeling that can be quite beneficial for a writer. All emotions can inspire. I then took a deep breath, telling myself that all of this was surely fate, and that this anger I was feeling was definitely going to serve me. In writing, I was right that, in one thing, no, it was not going to serve me to write. But yes, it was indeed about fate. I arrived around 2 o'clock after driving for several long minutes. The chalet was located in the mountains and therefore always constantly surrounded by snow. I parked my car in the garage and went out to reach the entrance of the chalet. I felt a tingling sensation in my legs, but given the sudden change in temperature, I didn't question it and attributed it to the cold hitting my warm legs. My hands continued to shake from that incident, to the point where I had trouble putting the key in the lock. But after a little while, I managed and was able to enter the cabin. I quickly realized how cold it was inside, and, without waiting, I headed to the living room to light a good fireplace fire. I made some coffee, and out of habit, I wanted to check my email on my phone. While it was brewing, I had completely forgotten that I hadn't taken my smartphone to be perfectly isolated from everything. So I sighed and decided to pull out a book I had just bought. It was Thinner, a novel by Stephen King, a book that had been recommended to me by a few friends. Once the coffee was ready, I set up my laptop and started to write. I think I spent 3 hours like that, typing on my keyboard. That's why I love to isolate myself. I don't see the time passing, and very often, the quality of the writing is different. And by the way, it's in this place that I wrote my second novel, and it's also this same novel that got me into writing seriously. It must be said that it sold several thousand copies, and I was particularly proud of it. I believed in my talent, and even more in the fact that isolating myself allowed me to lay out all my ideas perfectly. I can't stand the noise of cars, the vibrations of the phone. And hearing the children from the first floor crying and screaming put me in a black rage, a rage that completely prevented me from concentrating. There, I was perfectly alone, and absolutely nothing could prevent me from working properly. I got up and went to heat up a can of ravioli in the microwave. When I'm really caught up in writing, I can forget all my basic needs. Sadly, I can't prevent my stomach from growling. But what really pulled me out of my inspiration was this strange smell. Like a musty smell that I couldn't properly identify, nor even locate. I was patiently waiting in front of the microwave, thinking about the next step in my story. When I was pulled out of my thoughts by a small noise at my feet, I gently lowered my head and looked at what was causing it. At first, I wasn't sure what I was seeing. In fact, it was so unexpected that I could have stayed like that for long minutes, looking at what was on the ground. It was a finger, a human finger. I backed away suddenly, stumbling on the ground. My heart was beating wildly, and this time, I was almost certain I was about to have a heart attack. I placed my hand against my chest, and what I noticed doing that completely paralyzed me. I was missing a finger. I no longer had a middle finger. My hands started shaking again, more intensely than before, and the beeps from the microwave seemed distant, almost ghostly. I looked at the place where my middle finger should have been, and in its place was a tiny stump, blackened by rot. It was like I suddenly found myself in a terrible nightmare, not understanding anything. I felt no physical pain, yet my finger had indeed fallen to the ground, like a hair, simply detaching from the head, without us having done anything special. It was a pain. But on the other hand, far from being odorless, the smell of mold clearly came from there. I examined my hand, fighting to remain conscious. It was somewhat bluish, and the little finger, the pinky, seemed to be affected by the same ailment as my middle finger. Its base was blackened and particularly soft to the touch. Tears started to flow from my cheeks when I tried to press a little harder, and when I noticed that in doing so, I had pierced the skin at the base of my finger. I knew that by pulling on my finger with little force, it would easily detach. The smell that was coming from the hole I had just made was particularly repugnant. I got up without trying to understand what was happening to me, and I rushed towards my car. I had to get to the emergency room immediately and have a doctor treat me as soon as possible. I put the key in the ignition and tried to start the car. A strange cracking sound echoed in the cabin, almost surprising me. But I tried to ignore it and continued trying to start the car. After several attempts, I began to think that it would never start. And it was when I took a look around that I understood the reason why it wouldn't move from here. The rearview mirror was positioned in such a way that I could see the steep slope right behind me. And in it, I could see a long liquid trail behind my car, drawing a thick line from the start of the slope to my vehicle. I got out of the car, and with my own eyes, I could see the horrible truth. Gasoline was scattered all over behind the car. My tank had been punctured. Immediately, I understood who was behind all this. It was that man, the man I had run over. I didn't try to understand, and immediately thought of another solution. And the only one available to me was walking. I was about 20 kilometers away from the gas station. By walking quickly at around 3.72 miles per hour, I could reach my destination in just over 3 hours. Without thinking any longer, I rushed towards the cabin and prepared a large coat. I also took a pair of very thick boots. As the snow continued to fall more beautifully, I put on the coat. Hearing another noise at my feet, I dared not look. Anyway, I had a suspicion of what was causing that noise. Tears continued to flow and gently fell on my thick coat as I was taking off my shoes to put on my boots. The first thing that struck me at that moment was the smell. It was strong, much stronger than the one that was coming from my hand. I hesitated briefly, reluctant to confront the truth, but eventually removed my sock, revealing my right foot. Had green spots in places, there were also several holes revealing flesh, and my toes, for the most part, were all detached. I pressed on the back of my foot and noticed that my index finger easily sank into the putrefied flesh. In a recoil movement, I stood up and fell to the ground almost immediately. I had obviously lost my balance, as my foot had just torn into 2 pieces. When I got up, my left foot seemed to still be able to hold me on my leg, even though I felt a smell of decay was also coming from it. I sat on the ground for a long time, several minutes I think, since I felt no pain. All of this seemed completely improbable to me, but after a long moment of reflection, I understood what was happening to me. I thought back to the man I had knocked over, to the way I had spoken to him. But above all, I thought back to the sentence he had said to me. "Since you are so bad, sir, I will allow myself to offer you a little something so that your mind is in perfect harmony with your body." The man had cast a curse on me. It's the only plausible explanation in my opinion. Unless a new disease, a derivative of leprosy, has suddenly emerged, and I am its unfortunate first victim. This must be the only explanation. The punctured reservoir, the mysterious phrase, and my body falling apart. Everything was perfectly clear. When I realized the horrible truth, I knew there was no escape anymore. So I moved in front of the PC with so much difficulty that a large part of my legs stayed on the parquet floor, cold, at the entrance of the chalet. I opened my computer's sound recorder to leave this message. Originally, I wanted to record a farewell message intended only for my family. But I think telling everything that happened to me is an absolute necessity. Maybe this will remove the curse that weighs on me. I don't know. But I have to try. So I am currently stuck in my cabin, unable to walk, drive, or even save my own skin. My body is falling apart, and the smell emanating from me is becoming more and more unbearable. I can't see anything with my right eye anymore. And I think a good part of it is currently running down my cheek. During the recording, I also lost my entire right hand. My left hand, on the other hand, is slowly starting to fall off as well. It's splitting in half lengthwise, leaving behind brown and slimy traces. On my desk, why is all this happening to me? If you had asked me the question a few hours earlier, I wouldn't have been able to answer, but now I can. I'm not a likable person per se. In fact, I'm even someone detestable. You must have gritted your teeth when I told you about the time I knocked over that poor person. And that's perfectly normal. Who could act like that if not a disgusting piece of trash? I think what's happening to me isn't a curse per se, but simply karma. I deserve this curse because I've never been a good person. What happened to this man is just one example among hundreds of others. I often acted out of selfishness, vanity, and rarely have I shown sensitivity towards others, empathy or kindness, especially if it didn't benefit me directly. I think it's almost the end, in the next few minutes. A large part of my nose is peeling off, and my left leg is only held by a very thin strip of flesh. I am literally decomposing. And since I'm not bleeding and my blood seems to have coagulated, for a while now, I could even afford to say that I'm probably already dead. In other words, I will conclude this long speech with this sentence, which will directly complement the one that the man at the gas station said to me. I am a real piece of garbage, in the literal sense as well as the figurative sense. And to you who will listen to this, don't become like me. Don't become a horrible rot. Subtitling ST 501.